Welcome to meeting number 14, House of Commons Committee, Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates. We're here undertaking a study of the creation and planning, etc., of the Defence Investment Agency. We're going to start with Ms. Blanchard. You have a 5-minute opening statement, and then there's no opening statement from PCO, so we'll go right to questions after that. Just quickly, colleagues, you will receive in your P9 a couple letters from our clerk is forwarding on. We will address it in the second part, or second hour of the committee. Just have a quick brief overview so you're partially briefed on it, and then we'll address it then. It is regarding just the contract request. We do have bells at 5:15 just before we end. As we get closer, we can decide if we want to have a UC to continue for the last 15 minutes or just rise when the bells go. I'm hoping it'll be just when the bells go. We'll turn the floor over to Ms. Blanchard. Welcome to OGGO. The floor is yours for 5 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members of the committee, for inviting me here today. I'm accompanied by Emilio Franco, who is the Executive Director at the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat. Mr. Chair, I would like to provide an overview of the Treasury Board's role with respect to the Defence Investment Agency, which is a new special operating agency within Public Services and Procurement Canada. First, let me briefly explain the role of Special Operating Agencies, or SOAs. These agencies are not a new concept. They include well-established organizations such as the Translation Bureau and the Canadian Intellectual Property Office. And today, more than a dozen special operating agencies are in place within the government.
Agencies, or SOAs, are not legally separate entities, but are established as distinct units within an existing federal department. Importantly, they are subject to the same rules and requirements that apply across the federal government. Sometimes SOAs will be granted particular authorities, policy exemptions, or delegations that allow them to operate with greater flexibility in order to more efficiently execute on their mandates. For example, the Canadian Coast Guard has the authority to enter into sole source contracts above normal limits to deal with emergency situations. The Defence Investment Agency is one of the government's newest SOAs. As announced by the Prime Minister in early October, its mandate is to consolidate and accelerate defence procurement processes while also tying procurement to domestic industrial benefits. The establishment of the DIA and the authorities granted to it build on previous efforts to streamline Treasury Board's involvement in defence procurement while focusing on the areas of highest risk and maintaining a strong oversight role. Since 2018, defence procurements have been subject to a risk-based approach, permitting low and more recently medium-risk defence procurements to proceed without seeking Treasury Board approval. Underpinning this approach is a rigorous and mature governance in which the Treasury Board Secretariat is involved, as well as strong due diligence. An evaluation undertaken in 2024 of the risk-based approach found that this approach effectively decreased procurement timelines without compromising the integrity of the process. The authorities granted to the Defence Investment Agency represent a further iteration of this approach. For high-risk defence procurements of any value, Treasury Board approval of a procurement and negotiating strategy will be sought in advance of proceeding with solicitation activities or negotiations, and barring deviations from the approved approach, the agency will have the authority to enter into contracts without returning to the board. I should emphasize that this exceptional authority is specific to contracting. Other types of authorities, like project authorities or access to funds, will still require Treasury Board approval. To support transparency, this enhanced authority is publicly available on our website in the Directive on the Management of Procurement, as are all other exceptional limits. Mr. Chair, we've provided a copy of this enhanced procurement authority to committee members to assist with your study. On the topic of transparency, members will be interested to know that the Defence Investment Agency, like all departments and SOAs, is required to report publicly on whether its programs are achieving the intended results. This includes regular reporting, for example, through PSPC's Departmental Plan and Departmental Results Report. Further, its contracts will be subject to proactive disclosure, and its spending will be captured in the public accounts so that anyone interested can follow the plans, procurements, and spending of the agency. Monsieur le Président, le Conseil du Trésor.
Mr. Chair, the Treasury Board and its Secretariat will continue to play their roles in ensuring adequate control at the appropriate stage of the procurement process, while supporting the agency in its efforts to streamline defense procurement. We're now pleased to take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll start with Mr. Patzer for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, everyone, for coming today. Really appreciate it. Ms. Blanchard, I'm just wondering if you could just really quickly, what are the authorities given to the Defense Investment Agency that you just alluded to? If you could just quickly summarize that.
Sure. So they are specific to contracting. So I guess I should say first and foremost that the agency will have all of the authorities that are already in existence within PSPC, but a specific authority related to contracting and exceptional contracting limits. So as I mentioned, low and medium risk procurements, subject to the existing governance that is in place around this risk-based approach, can proceed without coming to Treasury Board. Treasury Board Secretariat is involved in the governance. But high-risk procurements would require Treasury Board approval of a procurement approach and strategy prior to engaging in the procurement process. And then assuming that there are no deviations from that approach, they could proceed with the procurement process and the negotiations and ultimately to signing the contract without coming back to the Treasury Board for that particular authority.
Okay, if I can just jump in right there, then could you just quickly differentiate between like a medium risk and a high risk one?
Sure. There is an evaluation of risk process that is built into this risk-based approach, and I might turn to my colleague Emilio to define that. But it does take into account things like financial risks in terms of whether it's a developmental project or something that is being purchased outright, legal risks in terms of the approach of acquisition that is being proposed. So maybe I can turn to Emilio to elaborate on that.
Absolutely. So the risk-based approach follows a established methodology by Public Service and Procurement Canada. There are a number of questions that go into that risk assessment. As Dominic mentioned, looks at aspects like legal, financial, contract risk, political risk, communications risk, as well as complexity, looking into obviously buying ammunition versus buying submarines, different complexity, different risk levels. And so based on that assessment, based on the responses to those questions, there is a risk profile that is given to the procurement, and that determines what authorities are required to proceed.
Okay, as far as the $100 million threshold for it to go through DIA, who came up with the $100 million threshold?
Good question.
That was part of the authority that was requested.
Requested by who?
It was part of the Secretary of State's request.
Rappel au règlement. Son microphone.
Point of order, the microphone was unfortunately not sufficiently synchronized so that we can get the interpretation. It's not your fault, but thanks for letting me know. So I missed the first bit.
How far back did you miss?
20 seconds.
20 seconds.
Now?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Maybe just say that last bit again. Who requested the $100 million threshold?
It was part of the Secretary of State's request.
Okay, thank you. And then is there any way that a high-risk item could fall into that sub-100 million category, or would that only be low and medium risk?
I think it's a really good question because we grapple often with whether dollar thresholds are a more appropriate measure, and I think where we've landed is that the dollar value doesn't always equate appropriately to level of risk, and so I think it would be rare to have a high-risk procurement that falls below $100 million, but I wouldn't state that as a matter of definitive fact.
So it was you guys that approved the framework agreement and the business plan then for the DIA?
Those were approved by Treasury Board.
Okay. Do you think you'd be able to produce the governing documents then for it?
Yeah, those documents belong to the department, but I'm happy to take the committee's interest back to colleagues at PSPC and the DIA.
Okay, and then you'll table them back with this committee if you could?
I can follow up with the committee, sure. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I would really appreciate that. I think I got time for maybe one or two more questions here. So just what is the government's definition of core defense needs? Do you know what that is?
I would only say that, from my perspective, those are the needs that are defined by the Minister of National Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces. So I myself don't have a definition of core needs, but I would say that those are as defined by the forces.
Would it be inappropriate for the industry minister then to be commenting on what is defined as a defense need?
I think the Minister of Industry has a role in terms of, as does his department, in terms of dealing with the industry and the defense industrial base. I wouldn't have a view on whether it's appropriate or not for him to comment on what are core needs. Okay,
we were just hearing, because they're trying to get to 5% for the NATO requirements, right? There's 3.5%, which would be like committed heavily to military, but 1.5% that would kind of be like in parallel or kind of maybe alongside it, but not necessarily required. Are you concerned about that 1.5% and what may or may not fall into that 1.5%?
I think it is a really important area of discussion. So I think you're referring to sort of the dual use investments that would fall into that category. It's not an area of expertise of mine, but I would note that there are undoubtedly instances where one objective can serve both purposes.
Right. I noticed that the minister commented on climate change being possibly part of the NATO commitments. Does that seem a little bit outside of the scope?
Yeah, again, I apologize. I'm not expert in what would meet the definition, but the NATO definition, of course, is something that all NATO parties will have to comply with.
Thanks very much. Mr. Gasparo, please.
Great. Thank you for your testimony and your service, all three of you. Thank you. So can you speak to why Canada chose to create a centralized defense organization?
Sure. So I think, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the objective is to streamline procurement processes, reduce some of the duplication, consolidate some of the parties that are involved in the defense procurement process with an objective of accelerating defense procurement. I think it's a broadly understood view that procurement processes are complex and can take a long time. And the dual objective would be to use those investments to support the domestic industry.
Great. And now I know that many of our allies, such as Australia, Germany, United Kingdom, France, all use a central defense organization like this. Was this part of the thought process? Looking at so was it part of the thought process? And then I guess a supplementary question to that is, are we learning best practices from some of these other organizations?
Yeah, it's a great question. What I can say is that I can't speak to what factors were considered ultimately in the decision to go with a special operating agency. But I do know that in the defense procurement space, certainly there has been a lot of analysis done of what exists in other countries with a view to doing exactly what you've described, incorporating or integrating the lessons learned from those organizations into the approach taken here in Canada.
Great. Just drilling down a little bit on that, what specific efficiencies do you expect the Defense Investment Agency to deliver compared to the current procurement process, particularly with how projects require Treasury Board approval?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and I think it speaks to the first point I was going to make, which is that the Treasury Board part of the defense procurement process is only one component. So I think the organization, as it is stood up and as it undertakes its mandate, is going to have to look at the entire process from start to finish, including definition of requirements, all the way through to ultimately accepting delivery of goods. I think the consolidation of authorities and accountabilities, so the organization is going to be drawing upon expertise that exists now in different organizations and bringing those organizations together. I think the approach is to have integrated teams managing each of the procurements that the organization undertakes. So I think there's going to be some efficiencies to be had in terms of of how those are approached, given kind of the bringing together of those experts. In terms of Treasury Board's role, as I've noted, we have and will continue to look at as they evolve. I mean, it's a very new organization, so there is a lot to be seen, but we will be continuing to work with them to see where they may need additional tools or flexibilities in order to achieve their mandate. The first, as I've noted, is tied to the contracting authority and the early approval in advance of engaging in those contracting procedures.
It's safe to assume, obviously, we're trying to learn the lessons from, past procurement models within the Treasury Board Secretariat and applying it to the Defense Investment Agency.
That's exactly right. And this is, as I stated in my comments, it's an extension of what I would say is kind of an ongoing,
Sort of process.
That's right. So not new to the Defense Investment Agency, but building on what we've seen or observed as successes and how we've approached this to date. And I would suggest, again, this is a new organization. There's probably more that we can do as a Secretariat to strike that balance.
Great. How much time do I have, Chair?
A minute and a half.
Okay. And can we drill down just a little bit? And I know you touched on some of this, but how will this agency simplify and modernize Canada's defense procurement?
I think so. So some of that remains to be seen. I mean, the organization was launched just at the beginning of October. They have a new CEO who's coming on board, who I'm sure will have views on how best to execute. I think the consolidation of expertise into the integrated teams that they have envisioned, I think will provide some efficiencies in terms of engagement with stakeholders, engagement with the domestic industry, which the objective is to support through this organization and this way of approaching procurement. So I think that there are some efficiencies there in perhaps compressing some timelines, accelerating some of the decision making that takes place in the defense procurement process.
Wonderful. Thank you. Did I nail it?
No, you left 18 seconds on the clock.
Sorry.
I'm afraid you'll have to
I have to become even more efficient.
The standing orders are that you are to apologize and resign, Mr. Gasparo. Madame Gaudreau, please, for 6 minutes.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I've already had answers to some of my questions, so thanks for being here. It's quite positive when we're talking about what is to come, what is supposed to happen, but I will pick up where my colleague left off. He referred to the UK, Australia, and some other allies where they have a centralized agency. And of course, with all due respect to the work you're doing, but we're talking about defense. So given the very specific and specialized issues at stake, why was it not within the Department of National Defense that this agency was set up? Thank you for the question. Unfortunately, I cannot answer to why that decision was made, but I can only say that there's a lot of expertise within PSPC, even though it's not exactly the same model they copied from other countries. But I believe that there are some advantages to be had by adopting this approach and by lodging the agency within the PSPC. Well, because I was slightly worried. I mean, is it maybe a lack of confidence towards the armed forces? Because we keep talking about the way services are delivered and the benefits and supports available to our veterans. So we talk about expertise and competencies. You're saying that they have a sufficient level of expertise, but will they need new types of expertise? Because we're talking about 5%, and that is a huge target. I just want to underline that the Department of National Defense will continue to play a big role, a major role. They will define and outline what they need. So it wouldn't be true to say that they no longer have a role to play. They still have an important role to play. And we at the Treasury Board Secretariat are trying to figure out the ideal, optimal way in which the departments can continue working together. Coming back to expertise, yes, this will be a good question for the new CEO. But what we know is that they will draw on and rely on the existing expertise within the different departments, but once they get going, they might realize that they need additional capabilities or expertise.
Qui devaient besoin, mais oui, c'est possible. Puis à ce moment,
I don't want to speculate, but it's hard to say. If they need additional expertise, at that point, they can go and seek that kind of additional expertise. I still have time. Well, congratulations. You have great French skills. I'm doing my best to speak English myself. Now, let's talk about the capacity of Canadian industry to produce, maintain, deliver on time the goods. Where are we in that sense? That's a very good question, but I'm not an expert in that field. I would say that there is definitely expertise that we possess with the approach that's being proposed. Support will be provided to these companies so that they can better position themselves and be part of this exercise of getting to the 5% target. And my last question. Well, if we can, we will receive documentation, the governing documents, and I appreciate that, but maybe people are wondering, how does it all work? Who gives the orders, as it were? Who makes the decisions? Who's going to be accountable if it doesn't work out? The Secretary of State will play a leadership role with regard to the agency, and Mr. Guzman will be starting in his new position within a couple of weeks. And the defense procurement responsibility falls on the PSPC, on the department. So that's about it. I don't know if you want to add something on that.
En français, mais qui donne les pouvoirs au ministre.
The Act gives certain authorities to the minister, and it also the working dynamics between the minister and the Secretary of State will be a question for them to figure out. I have 30 seconds left. Do you believe that the agency or the act of rather centralizing procurement will provide additional efficiencies? I would say that it's too early to call. Maybe we can come back and talk about this point. Thank you, Chair.
It's like an invite to come back. We'll now go to Ms. Block for 5-minute round.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. I just want to share a few facts because my questions are going to be around the salary and how that salary was derived. So here are some facts. Chief of the Defense Staff salary equals somewhere between $279,000 and $329,000. The Secretary of State Defense procurement salary is $284,500. The Defense Minister's salary is equal to $309,700. The Prime Minister of Canada's salary is equal to $419,600. And yet the CEO of the Defense Investment Agency, Mr. Guzman, who is a former Goldman Sachs colleague of the Prime Minister's, will have a salary of $679,000 plus bonuses. And when I look at the chart for the bonuses, it looks like he's going to get a maximum of 33% of a performance bonus, which would equal over $900,000. Can you tell us why he is being paid so much per year? And can you tell us why he's being paid so much, as this exceeds the compensation set for Crown Corporation CEOs as posted on the government's website?
Good question.
Mr. Chair, I'm from the Privy Council office, as I mentioned earlier, and I'm the Deputy Secretary responsible for appointments. So I will do my best to respond to your question. So in terms of the salaries that you quote, that's absolutely correct. For Mr. Guzman, it is not uncommon for us to bring people in from outside of the Government of Canada. It's a decision, the discretion rests with the Governor and Council to make decisions around the kind of leadership that's required for important organizations such as this one. We are responsible for working within the frameworks that the Governor and Council set to negotiate compensation for folks when they come in from outside. And as I mentioned, as you allude to, there is a framework in place, and we work within that framework, and the salary is consistent with the framework. As you suggest, there is also not only compensation, but performance pay associated with that. It's not a given that people are going to receive the top end, as you suggest. And I think, to my colleagues at Treasury Board's point, it will depend on the ability to achieve the objectives that the Minister and ultimately the Prime Minister have set for the CEO.
Thank you. It's my understanding that, according to the Order in Council, this appointment was made on the recommendation of the Prime Minister. Can you tell me, were there any other candidates considered for this position?
Mr. Chair, when we learned that the government was interested in setting up this organization, I did provide some ideas to my boss. The clerk of the Privy Council at the time was John Hannaford. So I couldn't get into the specifics of the individuals, obviously, to respect their privacy. But as far as I'm concerned, and from what I know from where I sit, we did have some names that we did suggest from our end.
Did your ideas include Mr. Guzman?
I wouldn't be in a position to give that kind of level of detail around personal information about the individual candidates that we suggested.
I'm just asking about Mr. Guzman. He was obviously the successful applicant, if in fact he was on a list. So, okay, thank you for that. In Budget 2025, there will be funding allocated to both PSPC to establish the DIA and set aside funding for the agency starting in 2026. And if we look at the budget that was tabled yesterday, if we look on page 199, it states that a new defense investment agency for the year 2026-2027 will receive $13 million in that year. Is that correct?
That would be...
I don't have the exact reference in front of me. I recall that it was in the order of $38 million over a period of 4 or 5 years. So yes, that would be to sustain the operations. I think the organization now is being sustained with some internal funding from PSPC. So I guess my last comment will be $13 million 2026-27, possibly a salary and bonus of almost $1 million. So the CEO is taking 1/13 of the budget for the year 2026-2027. Thanks.
Thanks. We'll now go to Ms. Rochefort, please, for 5 minutes.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Just to drill down on some of the questions that have already been asked, and so just basically to understand the extent that the Treasury Board of Canada, your Secretariat, will be involved in supporting public services and Procurement Canada to develop the departmental result indicators and measurement standards related to this new organization.
Sure. So, Mr. Chair, I would say that as with all departments, those requirements will be the same for the Defense Investment Agency, and through PSPC's departmental reporting, they will be reflected there. Treasury Board does play a role in approval of the core responsibilities of departments. So should there be amendments to the framework required, those would come to Treasury Board or to the appropriate delegated authority in that regard. Is there anything that you wanted to add on that, Emilio?
Well, just that Treasury Board does have a policy on results, and like any department, the Public Service Procurement Canada and the Defence Investment Agency within it will have to establish its results for its programs, and those will be, as Dominic mentioned, reported through the DRRs.
Do you have examples of what these metrics would look like or could be?
I wouldn't be able to speculate. The department would be best positioned to speak to how it will assess its results and report them to Parliament and Canadians.
Thank you. Okay, then could you speak to the role that the Treasury Board will play in defining the legal and the policy framework for federal contracting and procurement for the new defense agency?
I can maybe start and turn to Emilio. So the legal framework and the policy framework now is the same as it is for all departments as it relates to procurement, with the exceptions that I've already noted in the case of contracting. So as and when they may need additional delegations or additional exemptions from policies, they could seek those from the board, and we would, as a secretariat, have to do some analysis on a case-by-case basis to see how we would advise on those. Emilio?
Absolutely. Always happy to talk about procurement. So I think just, again, important to emphasize that, again, this organization follows the same rules as everyone else, with the exceptions that we've highlighted. And that includes the laws, regulations, trade agreements, and Treasury Board policies around procurement. The department will also have, and I think it's important to emphasize, its own set of controls, systems, and processes around procurement that are going to be specific and unique to how they operate. That will be, in addition to those broader frameworks. And they'll also be required to have, as any organization, the controls in place, oversight, audit, financial controls, record keeping, like all these rules will apply to this organization, just like they do any organization. And of course, the Auditor General, the Procurement Ombudsman will continue to have a role in overseeing procurements conducted by any organization, including this one. And I think last and very important to me is transparency. So its procurements will continue to be published proactively on the Open Government portal.
Maybe just a quick question then to follow up on that matter of transparency. How will it safeguard then sensitive defense information in that context?
Absolutely. So, is my microphone on? Procurements are, publication procurements are managed under the Access to Information Act. And so, of course, if there are sensitive aspects of a procurement that are not appropriate to be published, that information can be withheld. The general practice is that you still, publish as much as possible and only withhold the information that is sensitive.
Okay. Thank you for that information. That's all for me. Thank you.
I'll keep that in mind. Well, thank you very much. We'll now go to Ms. Gaudreau for 2.5, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. We were talking about the Canadian industrial capacity, and I'm wondering, the Governor is talking about the national industrial defense capacity and involving Canadian companies in this, but this is a very complex environment in which to operate. Studies will be done, so it's all a bit complicated. In Quebec, Davy, I believe, asked for a loan from Investissement Québec to be able to work with the federal government. So the development bank or development agencies, will they support regional companies? I'm really concerned on that front. It's a very good question. I don't know if I have a good answer, but the programs and the departments and the organisms you refer to, yes, they all have a role in terms of supporting the industry. Usually, this role doesn't come into play at the level of the defense industry, as it were. But it is possible, I don't want to speculate, but maybe going forward they will have a more robust role to play, given that these are exceptional and ambitious times. I will ask my second question. There is a military programming legislation in France, and parliamentarians have transparency into these programs and predictability for the industry that is great for the economy. So my question is the following. When you're planning to consult the parliament and at the same time talking to the industry, what will be your guiding principle? Because you will need to make choices, and we see what's going on in these times of crisis. So what can you tell us on that front? That is a very good question for the agency. So once they get going, I think they will be in a much better position to answer this question. Thank you, Chair.
Ms. Jansen, please.
Yes, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to start a little simple. So the old system, if I understand correctly, works like this. So you've got the Department of National Defence that decides what's needed. You've got the Procurement Canada that handles the contracting. Innovation and Science adds the gadgets and the tech requirements, and the Treasury Board signs off on the money. So there's 4 departments involved in every major defence purchase, correct?
At a minimum, yes.
Okay. And each one of them has their own mandate, approval process, and risk team, correct?
Yes, I think that's
okay. And you agree then that the system just wasn't really working, caused massive delays and cost overruns?
I think there are a number of reasons for cost overruns, but yes.
Okay. So the Prime Minister's solution was to add a 5th organization, the new Defence Investment Agency, to fix that process. Is that correct?
I would say that what's important is the way that this organization takes on some of the roles and responsibilities that had previously been undertaken by the ones that you mentioned.
Okay, so just so we're clear, none of the original 4 departments are being removed or losing their involvement in the process, correct?
I think that remains to be seen. This is early days for this organization. Certainly some of the capacities within those organizations may step back.
They're still
the
there.
organizations are still there, yes.
So we still have National Defence, Procurement, Innovation and Science, and the Treasury Board, plus the new agency who's sitting on top of them doing the big buys, over $100 million, is what I understand.
Yes, again,
okay.
There may be organizations within those departments that will be stood down or have smaller roles going forward, but they would still have a role, yes.
Okay, so and the person that was chosen to lead it, and for what seems to be close to a salary of $1 million, we shall see, if you include the bonuses, Mr. Guzman, comes from banking. So a career in finance, wealth management, capital markets, no background in government procurement, no military experience, from, as far as I could see, not even a cadet. Was he actually, Madam Donnellan, was he actually on your list?
Mr. Chair, as I mentioned earlier, and in the Prime Minister's announcement, Mr. Guzman was chosen, as you referred to, because he has decades of experience in investment in finance, capital allocation, project execution.
I was just asking if he was on your list. I wonder, Mr. Chair, if you might ask. It's a fairly direct question, if you might help me out with.
Should be able to provide an answer?
I'm not in a position to speak to who specifically were on the various lists out of respect
no, I'm just
for
asking specifically about Mr. Guzman, and I'm just wondering, like, did the PM go over your head if he wasn't on your list?
Chair, a point of order.
Yeah.
The witness has answered this question 3 times now.
Okay.
So, she has answered. She's given you an answer.
Let Mr. Gasparo finish his point of order, and then I will.
She's given an answer 3 times on this very exact question, and the member is borderline badgering the witness. So you're going to spend the rest of the time asking the same question.
Okay.
She's giving you the answer.
Okay, Mr. Gasparo, thanks. I have the point of order. I don't think it's badgering. I do believe it's a very straightforward question, and I think Ms. I'm sorry, I can never pronounce your name right.
McClymont. It's not as
sorry,
bad
I
as
apologize.
it looks.
I think
The Y is off-putting.
I think it's a straightforward question. I think we'd appreciate a straightforward answer to this. I don't think it's betraying any confidentiality.
Simple answer would be, obviously, he was a name that was under consideration because he was asked to take on the role. That would be the best that I could answer for you.
So the reform isn't being led by someone who's ever bought a or F-35 jet. It's being led by someone who's managed portfolios and investment funds. So how much time do I have left?
Just over a minute and a half.
Okay, so if we look at what appears to be happening here, we have a massive new spending envelope of more than $80 billion over 5 years, centralized control, so one agency managing the big purchases, private sector banker in charge whose expertise is moving capital, not delivering hardware, and language straight out of an industrial strategy, building domestic supply chains, leveraging innovation. It sounds like the government's building an investment portfolio, not a stronger military. So the idea of building a military-industrial complex that's market-driven seems quite un-Canadian. And I'm just wondering, should we be concerned with Mr. Guzman at the helm, that our defense dollars are going to be leveraged for market outcomes rather than military ones?
Mr. Chair, I would reference again the Prime Minister's news release where he was quite clear that he was of the view, and that is the Governor and Council's prerogative to pick the people they feel are best suited for the roles of these high priority Governor and Council positions, that he had the expertise, as you alluded to from the member, capital allocation, projects execution, and large financial projects. I would just go back to some of the comments that my Treasury Board colleagues made. Oftentimes when we're looking for great people to lead these organizations, we look for specific background that we in the government may not have. We look for leadership acumen, and we know that we've got skill sets within the government that can support the member, or support the individual in terms of succeeding. Thank you.
That's our time. Ms. Sudds, please, for 5.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the three of you for being here and for the work that you do. I think, first of all, perhaps a simple question, maybe, for whomever is best positioned to answer it, and that would be how it is intended that the new Defence Investment Agency will work with Canadian industry. Of course, there is a tremendous amount of interest given the steps that our government is taking around our commitment to NATO. And that opens up massive opportunities for Canadian industry when it comes to innovation, when it comes to jobs and investment. So how will this enable us to grow Canada's defence industrial base?
Maybe I can start, and if others have comments, can jump in. I understand that there have been and will continue to be extensive consultations with the domestic industry now regarding what roles they think they can play and how the government can best support them in executing on those roles. As noted earlier, there are a number of areas of real strength within the domestic industry as it stands, and so there may be opportunities to bolster those capacities based on the types of strategic investments that the investment agency is positioned to undertake. I think they will have a better sense and have a better answer to the question than I'm able to provide here, unfortunately. But as I said, I know that those conversations are very actively underway on a number of different fronts, including with PSPC, National Defence, and those who are at the Defence Investment Agency.
Okay, incredible. Thank you for that. Certainly a massive opportunity for our Canadian defence sector. Next, pivoting slightly to think about how the Defence Investment Agency will work within Treasury Board's existing approval frameworks. I would imagine that there are some changes being contemplated in order to streamline the decision-making process without, of course, compromising on accountability. Can you speak to that?
Sure. Thank you for the question. I think for us, I would say at the Secretariat, it's not a choice between the status quo, maintaining the status quo, and completely withdrawing and abrogating our responsibilities. It's really a matter of finding the right point in time for the board to be involved. And I think the example that we gave today as it relates to contracting authority is a really good example of that. So this will give the Treasury Board an opportunity to have line of sight on the procurement approach that is being considered at a much earlier stage than they would under the current approach, and potentially influence that as they see fit. It takes, as I noted, a risk-based approach rather than purely basing it on other determinations like dollar amounts. So focusing their attention, I think, on the areas that are most important. I think we as a Secretariat are sort of in a process of kind of continuous improvement when it comes to really calibrating our role in terms of the challenge function that we perform, because our mandate is not solely to challenge, it is also to support and support departments in achieving their objectives, helping them identify risks and mitigations, and where we sort of situate ourselves in that process, I think, is a really, really important question that we reflect on a lot. And we're continuing to do that. So the case we're talking about today with the defense procurement dimension is one part of that. But we are continuing to look at that more generally. How can we be more efficient? Are we asking for the right kind of information? Are we asking for it at the right moment in time? And so that we can provide sound advice and support to the Treasury Board as it makes its decisions.
Incredible. Yeah, I think that pretty much wraps up my time. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Mr. Gill now for 5 minutes, and then Ms. Khalid.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for coming. Last night, the Industry Committee heard from experts who testified that the Defense Investment Agency bureaucracy will only be responsible for 8% of defense procurements. That leaves 92% of the procurement stuck in the other 5-department loop, which is DND, PSPC, ISED, Justice, and TBS. What are the plans to fix the other 92% of procurement?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I don't have the stats that you've cited. I will only say that, again, this is a very, very new organization. So that is an area of interest for us at the Secretariat, is working with the organization to understand the process for onboarding new procurements. But it's true that there will be procurements that still take place outside of the Defense Investment Agency. Again, making sure or supporting the organization and making sure that they are equipped to take on the procurements, I think, is an ongoing area of conversation that we will have with the agency.
What access will Mr. Guzman have to senior government officials besides the Defense Secretary? And what screens have been put in place to make sure there's no perceptions of any ethical violations or improprieties that could be perceived as such by the general public? Because there's already a significant erosion of public trust, as it is, when it comes to these kinds of appointments out there.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Guzman will be part of the senior echelons of the public service, so he will work closely with colleagues at Treasury Board, at Defence, at Public Services and Procurement Canada. To the question on the ethical conflict of interest, if you will, certainly he will be subject to the Conflict of Interest Act, as would any reporting public office holder. I would say for our part, we have been working closely with the Commissioner when we had prospective candidates who are coming in from outside who may or may not have assets or holdings that could run, will need to be governed by the Act, if you will. We have arranged for a prospective information sessions with the Ethics Commissioner to make sure that individuals can comply with the law before we consider them for appointment, and the Ethics Commissioner was good enough to do this in this set of circumstances. So I don't have specific details about the conversations that the Commissioner would have had with Mr. Guzman, but certainly that will be part of his responsibilities as a reporting public office holder.
So will he have that 1-year cooling off period? That
he'll be subject to all of the requirements of all reporting public office holders under the Conflict of Interest Act and the Lobbying Act as well.
Okay. How much time do I have, Chair?
About a minute and a bit.
So one of the challenges, I come from Windsor, and we have an affordability crisis brewing for quite a while now. How does creating this new agency with a high-paid executive reflect the government's priorities? As we heard from Ms. Block, 1/13 of the salary is going to be going to him off the budget. And what's the expected return on investment? And will this agency commit to publishing clear results like procurement savings, faster delivery timelines, support for the industry, and will they also be involved in the acquisition of the F-35?
I can't speak to specific procurements that it will undertake. That would be a question to ask the agency and the CEO. In terms of whether it will be required to report on its results, yes, it will be, just as all departments are, required to report on its results through departmental reporting.
So is there any kind of governance or oversight framework that the agency has been given, or is there some establishment of those frameworks that you could share with us?
I think some of the documentation that was already requested would speak to some of what you're looking for. In terms of governance frameworks, I think I can only speak to kind of the Treasury Board part of what exists as far as governance and oversight. But I can say that as it relates to defense procurement, there is there are several layers of governance and oversight already in place. And the agency will continue to be subject to that oversight.
Since you hold the purse strings and hold the wallet, what can you provide us a breakdown of the budget and the staffing plan? Because you're going to be citing the check for these folks, I'm assuming.
Well, the funding was just announced in the budget, and so there will be a proposal that will need to come to the board to access that funding, and more details will be
Can you
provided.
give us that breakdown?
I don't have that information now.
Okay, so who would?
It will be for the agency to provide to the Treasury Board when they're ready to come and access that funding.
Do you sign the check? You can't give us that information?
I'm speaking only about the funding that was just announced in the budget.
Okay. Thank you. That is our time. Ms. Khalid, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I'll start by asking, for the purposes of our constituents that are listening in on this committee today, what's the difference between an agency and a department? Why does it matter?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a very good question. So I think what I would say about the special operating agencies that have been established, and as I noted, there are over a dozen that are in existence today. I think dating back, the earliest, I think, are from the early 90s. They are units within existing departments, so it's relatively straightforward to stand them up in that regard, and they are subject to all of the same requirements and structures that a department would be. They can, though, as I noted, be given special authorities. So there are some cases where I would say that most of the SOAs that we've looked at are sort of service-oriented and have a really discrete mandate. Some may, so they can be quite large, like the Canadian Coast Guard, and be very small. But as I said, they don't require legislation to establish. They are subject to all the same rules and requirements as other departments, and they, as I said, can perform kind of a discrete function and have their own kind of unique footprint.
So what I'm hearing you say is that there's a lot more discretion that's allowed in agencies versus departments. Is that?
Not necessarily. They could seek those authorities should they wish, and should those be tools. And I'm speaking only about authorities that rest with Treasury Board, but there are other authorities or delegations that exist even within a department that may or may not be given to those special operating agencies. So authorities that rest with the minister could be delegated to the special operating agencies as well. But that would depend on the specific mandate, I would say, of those agencies.
So on this specific agency that we are talking about, can you outline for us what discretions are allowed to them? What decisions are they able to make on their own as an agency without the executive branch filling in?
Do you want to speak to that, Amelia?
Well, I would just say that, again, the Defence Investment Agency is an entity within Public Service Procurement Canada. And in setting up that agency, it will need to determine the controls and processes that exist, and to what extent the existing processes and controls within the department extend, or what internal flexibilities they're providing. And I think they'd be best placed to elaborate on how that will be managed.
Thank you for that. Ms. McClymont, if I can please ask you, how does an agency like this interact with international obligations that we have, for example, with NATO and with other multilateral organizations? How do they fulfill the role that Canada needs to fulfill with these obligations?
I'd love to try to answer that, but I'm the appointments person, so I'd love to give you my own personal view, but that would probably be bad. I don't know. Can you take it, Dominique?
Thank you, and I'll try as well. I mean, I can't speak to the specific interactions with NATO itself, but certainly in terms of the objective of meeting the spending target, this is going to be a really important tool in terms of achieving that objective. So with a view to streamlining the approach to procurement and expediting, certainly in the amounts that are being talked about to achieve the 2% and ultimately a 5% target. The pace of procurement, I think, again, it's well understood, can in some cases take a really long time. And so this will be, as I noted, the objective or the driver in part for this organization is to ensure that it can expedite and accelerate the process with a view to achieving or meeting those international commitments, including the NATO target.
So when we talk about meeting those commitments, does the creation of the agency and the amount of money spent in creation of the agency count towards that obligation?
That's a good question. I don't know if Emilia knows the answer, but that may be one that we have to get back to you on.
I wouldn't be able to answer. I don't know the answer of whether or not this organization is contributing to the 5%. I know that there's an exercise to assess Canada's contributions to its NATO targets, with organizations bringing forward the work that they do in support of defense, but I don't know specifically of this organization and how it contributes.
Thank you very much. And we'll just finish with Ms. Gaudreau for 2.5.
En fait, j'ai une question.
I have one question, but I do have a bit of a problem. I need to be reassured. How can we be sure that there won't be a doubling of efforts? Because we're talking about hundreds of simultaneous decisions. Maybe previously I wasn't aware of this, but we have the DND, the Treasury Board, PSPC, and the Privy Council Office. So who is accountable if there's a failure? Thank you for the question. It will be the agency, and that is part of the reasoning for this effort. It's about consolidating different authorities so that there would be fewer decision points with regard to procurement that they will be asked to do. And the agency is new, so this will be something they will take care of, and they will try to avoid the duplication that exists at this point in time. Well, Mr. Chair, this is an opportunity because, well, unfortunately, we don't always get to do this, but I would really appreciate if we could follow the process, the governing documents, and maybe in 6 months' time you will have additional answers to our questions. We need to keep a close eye on this. This is the taxpayers' money, and so if we want to show people that this is possible, especially those who doubt, I think you should come back and we'll then ask you for additional information. Well, I think the PSPC and the agency will be really well positioned to answer your questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We're going to actually add a couple more interventions. We'll go to Mrs. Block and then back to... To Ms. Rochefort? Okay. Mrs. Block for 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity, and we'll see if I can use up the 5 minutes. The government announced a new policy, the Buy Canada policy, applying to contracts given out by the federal government. How many Canadian suppliers are expected to replace suppliers from other nations with the Buy Canada directive in effect? Do you have any idea of the displacement that might take place?
I don't have the specific numbers in front of me. So the policy that was announced back in September, the specific details of how that will be implemented are being finalized. And so that will be the commitment in the announcement was by the end of November, so those should be forthcoming. I think what's important to highlight is right now the government does most of its business with Canadian suppliers. What the opportunity through the Buy Canadian policy and strategy will look at is how do we support inputs, materials, and the use of Canadian content in the procurements that we're conducting. So one of the announcements spoke to how we can support Canadian materials, so aluminum, steel, wood, in making sure that those are components of the things that we're buying. So we're buying from a Canadian company and looking at how that Canadian company can leverage inputs from Canada in the delivery of that work. So I think that's an important piece of that. The specific details will follow, but as I mentioned, I think the vast majority of our current contracts are with Canadian companies, and this is about how do we work with those Canadian companies to support more Canadian content and inputs.
Thank you very much. Just like the National Shipbuilding Strategy, which sought to ensure that all provinces would be able to participate in the supply chain of the shipbuilding initiative. Can you tell us how that might impact what we're seeing with the new Defense Investment Agency? For example, over the last couple of years, the committee has learned that oftentimes contracts are constructed in ways that favor particular companies and exclude others. Are you contemplating what the rules may need to look like for contracting through the Defense Investment Agency that would ensure that smaller companies perhaps continue to have the chance to seek those opportunities to procure with the Government of Canada?
So I think there's two aspects to this. I think first, important to highlight that national defense remains responsible for setting its requirements. And so, it needs to determine what the technical capabilities and needs are of the forces, and those are articulated to the Defense Investment Agency to then determine the procurement. The Defense Investment Agency does have a mandate, that was one of its core objectives announced in its announcement, to work with the Canadian industry. And so I would expect that in those conversations, they're looking at how best can procurement support domestic industry, either through the prime contractors or through that broader supply chain. And that will be a factor, I expect, in how they determine their procurement approach, which should ultimately result in the broader supply chain across Canada being supported through these activities.
Thank you.
Mr. Gasparo, please.
Great, thank you. Can you get into a little bit how the primary objectives of the organization will contribute to Canada's GDP growth, and what multiplier effect is expected from defense-related industrial activity?
Thank you for the question. I don't have the metrics in terms of those targets. What I would say is that the intention is to use procurements in support of equipping the forces as a tool or a mechanism that can also support Canadian domestic industry. So I don't know the metrics. I think we've mentioned that they will have to establish their own targets, and those would be good questions to be placed to the DIA. But again, from the perspective of Treasury Board Secretariat, we're kind of only one component of what is a much bigger and larger procurement process chain, I would say.
Well, I think it's probably safe to assume that if you're streamlining waste, you're making it more efficient for large procurement and, I guess, as an offshoot of infrastructure development, that it will provide a positive impact to our gross domestic product. And so I'm assuming it's safe to assume it will be positive, and the fact that we've attracted talent to the agency to help drive that, I think, is something that should be viewed as positive.
I would agree with you. Yeah.
So how will the Defense Investment Agency, from your perspective, operationalize its goal to tie procurement to domestic industrial benefits? And then we can talk about some of the metrics maybe that we'll use in that regard.
Yeah, again, I think, and I might turn to Emilio. So there is an industrial technical benefits policy that already is in place. And so I think the way that the DIA is structured, I think, is going to be helpful as far as executing on some of the commitments and requirements under the ITB policy. Did you want to add to that, Emilio?
I think you hit on it, but just to highlight that the ITB policy requires that defense procurements over a specific threshold look at the benefits that will be created within Canada by virtue of the work, and actually requires that suppliers that are subject to that policy for contracts, that for every dollar of contract value, there's a dollar of investment in Canada, whether that be direct industrial inputs, whether that be training programs, or other kind of spin-off benefits. The key commitment here is that every dollar we spend on the contract, there needs to be benefits generated for Canada in some form, and that becomes a commitment from the supplier and is tracked and managed throughout the life of the contract. And I think the DIA will play a key role. We've seen that the ISED personnel will be joining the DIA to support that delivery and execution of those benefits for Canada.
And you're comfortable that Canadian firms will benefit from these major defense contracts where appropriate?
I think that's one of the key objectives of the DIA. And so, it is intended to work with the Canadian industry to look at what the opportunities are and look how we can leverage and build our procurements in a manner that supports work for Canadians and for Canadian businesses. I think one of the things that we see with this approach is that Canadian companies have seen in the past challenges with booms and busts and short-term contracts that make it difficult to build capacity and put strong footholds. I think the agency will be looking at what kind of contract approaches, more longer-term contracts, more contracts that allow for more sustained economic growth, and see what those opportunities are to drive both delivery of equipment for the forces and for our Canadian economy.
I'll yield the rest of my time to my colleague.
You have 20 seconds. Is there another round?
No, 20 seconds.
Well, I'll just make a quick comment then. Just regarding the background for Mr. Guzman, I was noting as well that the mandate of the agency is not just purchasing, it's also to help Canadian companies, just to follow my colleagues here questioning, to help them scale up so that they can develop cutting-edge capabilities and compete globally. And I would say Mr. Guzman's background really fits that ability to be able to help Canadian companies. I would say in that sense, he's an excellent choice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, that's it. Witnesses, thank you for being with us. Just very quickly, quick question for you. You mentioned that Mr. Guzman would be subject to the one-year cooling-off period. My understanding is that is the general rule unless overridden or excused by the Ethics Commissioner. Do you know if that has been the case for Mr. Guzman?
I'm not aware. I mean, we could certainly try to follow up for you, but usually that happens bilaterally between the commissioner and the reporting public officeholder directly, so we don't often have that direct information.
Okay, if you have it, would you provide it?
For sure.
Positive or negative?
For sure, we can check and see what we have on our records.
Wonderful.
Okay.
And we will excuse you. We're going to suspend for a few moments to dismiss our witnesses and bring in Mr. Badar.